game.
Cavs Knicks tonight, McNuggets. That's huge. We should be talking about it.
It couldn't be less huge.
It's
even
huge.
though I'm excited to watch it.
Hey, we gonna find Evan Mobley. Listen, I'm gonna tell you, Evan Mobley. Let me find out that he didn't turn back into a unicorn.
Jim, we're doing Cavs in overtime because we got to give Jimmy Donovan the appropriate time he deserves.
We
because
do.
The Cleveland community lost an icon this weekend, and Jay, I know you worked with him incredibly close. And G. Bush, you got emotional on the postgame show talking about him yesterday. Jason, your article in The Athletic on Jimmy went up during the show. It's officially posted, so you guys were all close with Jimmy. And Bull, I know you've been in the same city, worked along Jimmy for a long time, but it felt weird not hearing Jimmy's call of the game-winning touchdown in the aftermath of the win yesterday. And it felt like, at least to a certain extent, that win yesterday was for Jimmy. He was there doing what he could from above to help out the Browns.
My favorite image from yesterday was the picture of Kevin and Andrew Barry taking the game ball to Jimmy's home and presenting it to his wife Cheryl and his daughter Meghan. That was my favorite image of yesterday. Jimmy is, you talk about a unicorn. When I first saw Jimmy, I was in my sophomore year of college, and I saw him when I was home on break, and he looked so young. He's 25 years old, 26 years old. And I'm like, wow, how does a guy that looks that young make it to Cleveland? Cleveland was like the 9th or 10th largest market at the time. And so my first impression was, wow, he's so young. And then my second impression was, and I've been a student of television sportscasting really my whole life. I always had one eye on that. And I knew that when I first saw it, that's what I want to do. And I said right away about Jimmy, there is something really different about him. His passion isn't fake, it's real. His enthusiasm is genuine. And his personality poured through every sportscast he ever did. So I set up my parents' VCR to tape for 15 minutes every night, 6:15 and 11:15, which was the window that Jimmy's sportscasts would fall in. And when the tapes would get full, they would send the VHS tapes to my dorm at Bowling Green. And I was maniacal. I studied everything. I watched every single show that he did that came over tapes. I still have 12, 15 VHS tapes. For some reason, I never got rid of them. They're nothing but Jimmy Donovan sportscasts. It's the end of weather, a commercial break, Jimmy's sportscast, and the end of the show. Mm-hmm. And I would fast forward through the weather and the commercials, and then when Jimmy would come up, I was fixated. And my roommates would constantly hear this. And they're like, bro, what are you watching? That happened like a month ago. And I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not watching for the news. I'm watching for the stylistic genius that was Jimmy Donovan. And then I thought, well, I don't know what other sportscasts look like. You only see local sportscasts in your town. And I had only lived in a market that could see Cleveland and Toledo, and I knew there was a vast difference between the two. But even against behemoths in the market like Nev Chandler and Casey Coleman, and not taking anything away from those guys, they were great in their own way. And by the way, also Browns play-by-play men. Yep. But there was something about watching Jimmy that I just couldn't take my eyes off of. And I styled my pattern, I patterned my style after Jimmy. When I learned that Jimmy was mostly ad-lib, then I said, well, then I have to mostly ad-lib. I don't want to be tied to a teleprompter because Jimmy thinks that's a bad idea. I literally wanted to become Jim Donovan. And then when I had the opportunity later in my career to work for him, it was amongst the highlights of my career. I remember conversations that I would have with Jimmy just talking about how you approach a sportscast. And just talking sports with him was a dream. We tend to think of Jimmy more as the Browns play-by-play man. And we've had some good ones. But he wasn't just good at Browns and play-by-play work. His sportscasts were the best I'd ever seen, and I later found that to be a fact as I traveled around the country and saw the greatest sportscasters every market had to offer. And there were many of them that were great, but none of them were as good as Jimmy. And he'll never be replicated or duplicated, and we're going to miss him greatly. We already do because he retired a couple months ago, but it's just a really, really sad time for all of us in Northeast Ohio.
Yeah, the first time I ever did things, in the industry, I worked on the Browns radio network, and I used to do the in-game stuff, and I used to freak out because I used to be like, man, I got to turn their mics off, or I got to tell these people when to go to break, or I got to do this, and I used to freak out all the time. And one time, in between the breaks, he was just like, "Hey, I heard one of your shows." And I'm like, "What?" He said, "Yeah, you did a show the other day. He's like, you got a unique personality, man. Keep at it." And I'm like, man, like, that was wild to me. Like, he was the first person at that time, I'm thinking I'm going to just shut up and tell you when I don't want no problems. But that meant he didn't have to say that. Like, I mean, that meant a lot to me. And just, seeing him in passing and doing certain things and knowing that he devoted, half of his, adult life, more than half of his life to the Cleveland Browns. And, when the news came down, I don't know why it hit me that hard, because I just remember him retiring a couple of days ago. And the way that happens, I was sitting there thinking, I'm like, man, maybe Jay or people knew it a little deeper than we knew.
No, we did. When he wasn't able to go to the Browns induction, that when I heard that he couldn't make that, I knew that it was really, really serious. Because he would have loved to have been there, and we all remember him smashing the guitar after he was declared cancer-free last year. One of my favorite moments ever inside that stadium. And then when he couldn't make it to the Cleveland Sports Hall of Fame induction just a couple of weeks ago, and then last week he had lost his appetite completely and stopped eating. And I know from going through it with my dad that when you go into hospice and you completely stop eating, that unfortunately the end is very, very near, and that's the way it worked out. And
because in my mind I always thought that he was going to beat it. Like, I think that was the part that hit a little bit. And for me, I just, that's why this thing is important to us, because we all love the Browns and we are some sort of community. And I think in a small way, after all the crazy stuff that was going on, it really helped bring the Browns community back together and realizing what it's all about.
Something we can all agree on.
Yes.
We all love Jim Donovan.
Are you doing the 7 tonight? Are you doing that?
I'm going to be up there for it, yeah.
I'm coming back to do the 7 o'clock. For those who don't know, Channel 3 is doing an hour-long special tonight on Jimmy, the 7 o'clock. What is normally front row at 7 will now be an hour-long special.
Which was Jimmy's show.
Yeah, it was Jimmy's show. It'll now be an hour-long tribute to him. I put up an article I wrote late last night and finished up this morning on The Athletic. I was pretty vulnerable, just talking about, like, my big regret is I didn't reach out to him. And I heard from him 2 weeks ago was the last I heard from him, and he was worried about Kevin. And he was worried about Kevin's job security. Yeah. He loved Kevin. He loved Kevin Stefanski. He just thought he was a high-character guy and the right guy to lead this franchise. And he texted me a couple weeks ago to say, like, how's our guy? How's Kevin doing? You think he's going to be okay with all this? And I always since from the time he retired, I wanted to reach out to him, and I wanted to allow him to tell his story, to tell his goodbye. I wanted to give him the opportunity to tell the fans goodbye, and I never reached out to him because, and I wrote today in the story, how do you ask someone if they're ready to die if you don't know the answer? And I didn't know if he was ready or not, and I don't frankly think he was up until a few days ago. From talking to people who knew him well, I think within the last few days, he's really when he came to terms with how this was going to go, and by then he was ready. And by then it was probably too late. So that's a regret that I carry, that I didn't reach out to him and I didn't give him that opportunity. But like everybody else, I love getting to know Jimmy. We really got to work together when I was covering the Cavs, and we would do stand-ups together on the Cavs. And he hit it well. He was a huge Boston sports fan. Loved the Celtics, loved the Bruins, was a season ticket holder for the Bruins when he was a kid. Every time he saw me, he would ask me, could the Celtics do it this year? What do you think of their coach? What do you think of these guys? He loved the gossip. He loved Browns gossip. He loved NBA gossip. He just loved to know, like, what little nugget do you have about my Celtics and about the NBA? So I would come early. I would do that 7 o'clock. Mary Kay and I would do the 7 o'clock with him these last few years when I was more involved with the Browns. And I would get there 6:30, 6:35 or so right after the newscast ended, so we could have a good 15 or 20 minutes just to BS and chew the fat and just talk about whatever. And I love those moments. And one more thing, I wrote about it today, but Dallas Gentry was his bone marrow transplant donor in 2011. Jimmy would have died in 2011 without a bone marrow transplant. And Dallas Gentry, a corrections officer in Virginia with no connection to him whatsoever, put himself on the bone marrow transplant list 14 years earlier. And he was giving blood, and they asked him if he wanted to be a bone marrow. He didn't know anything about it. And he said, yeah, sure, whatever. Went on with his life. 14 years later, he got a call that he was a perfect 10-point match for Jimmy. And it would be painful for Dallas, but if he was willing to go through a bone marrow transplant, this man could live. This man he never met could live. Dallas said yes. They had a relationship over these last 13 years. Dallas became part of their family. And because Dallas Gentry was selfless enough to go through a little bit of pain, he gave us 13 extra years with Jim Donovan. And for that, I say thank you to Dallas Gentry.
Well said.
You know, it's you've made a difference when people that have never met you feel like they know you.
Yeah.
Right? And
Feel like family.
yeah, and I feel like, you know, I had been very close with Les Levine, and he passed away a few years ago, and then Michael Stanley passed away, and now
We're
Jim.
losing our forefathers.
I know.
Danny Coughlin.
That hit
Danny
hard.
Coughlin.
Danny
That
Coughlin
really
was
hit,
another one.
like
Yeah.
the fact that these are our elder statesmen
I
that
know.
we listen to.
We are
These are
losing our
guys who are,
forefathers.
you know, legends, and you feel like you know them, even if you don't know them. And that's how a lot of people felt like Jim. There's something special, and it's changed in recent years because people don't listen to the radio like they used to. We, the four of us, although different ages, are all old enough to remember what it was like being a kid, and not everything was on TV. And that radio that you'd have on your nightstand to pick up, you know, the local broadcast, and sometimes you'd pick up something from Chicago or whatever, you know.
Well, it was blacked out here, and when I was in Canton, that was the way we listened. It was the games were blacked out.
And you listened on the radio, and there was a special connection that you would make with your play-by-play guy, because it felt like he represented you and your fandom. And Jimmy, although he was from Boston, which I can appreciate because obviously he embraced being a Clevelander, you'd never know it because he was. When you watched him do are there phony people in the media? Of course there are, but he wasn't one of them.
He loved the Browns.
He is so passionate about this team. He lived and died with it. And so when you lose somebody like that, yes, obviously it affects his family and those who knew him way more. But every fan of the Browns on the planet feels like they've lost somebody they knew today. And real quick, specifically, because obviously Jim died of leukemia, and my wife, you know, had also a transplant and went through many treatments for leukemia, and she's doing well now. But I think to follow up on what Jason said, please, everybody, there are some people that cannot get transplants because there's not enough people willing to donate, and I don't even think that they're not willing, they just don't know enough about it.
BeTheMatch.org.
Right, BeTheMatch.org. Don't just donate blood, donate bone marrow. It's actually not as bad a process as it used to be. It's even less painful than it was when Jimmy did it for the person giving it. But it is so important. So if especially for young people, because it's usually better matches.
I'm glad you went there with it.
Yeah.
Let's bring something good from it.
Yeah.
Just a quick programming note. We're going to skip overtime. We're going to stay on and do super chats. One last thing that triggered my memory that you said that you used to love to come in early before the 7. Jimmy was in his glory from 3:30 to 4:30 every day. He would come in, and he was a magnet for people. If he was back in the sports section, there were 5 or 6 people that every day gravitated to the sports section. And Jimmy was just being Jimmy.
Yeah.
Being funny. Jimmy's wit was incredible. He was so funny and quick and witty. But he would hold court, and there would be people that probably had heard some of those stories once or twice already, but you still hinged on every word because Jimmy was a master storyteller. And I used to love to hear the laughter from that corner of the building. You know, the sports office is always called the toy box because, you know, we're at fun and games. And nobody exemplified that more than Jimmy. And when he was in a good and funny mood, he automatically lifted everybody up to that spot. And he is definitely going to be missed. He's been missed in our newsroom since he left. The fact that he wasn't from Cleveland, but embraced it as hard as Clevelanders do, is really, to me, Jimmy's most incredible trait. He was from Boston.
Yeah.
And yet,
I'll
I'll never forget his call after we finally beat the Jets on that Thursday night. Is this what it feels like?
Yeah.
Is this what it feels like to get a win? And in the Steelers' regular season finale, when they clinched a playoff spot, the only thing missing is you. And I'll never forget those lines. And now the only thing missing from Browns Nation is you, Jimmy. We love you.